Hey guys, Ricky here with DoD Contract Academy. Thank you for tuning in this week. So I'm taking it back to basics on this episode. We do have a lot of great interviews coming up, but I wanted to get in here and just talk about something that I believe to be foundational. If you want to succeed, it's selling to the government. And I've had a lot of conversations lately where companies were aware of this. I have talked about this on previous episodes, but I think it's good to always come back to this. And I've struggled with how I was going to name this episode. I think I finally landed on don't respond to RFPs. I'm saying that a little bit tongue in cheek, but there's some core truths that you need to understand about how the acquisitions process works, right? So at this point, you probably understand that the government does not buy things the way you and I buy something. You know, the government has been regulated since the birth of the country on how they're going to buy things from Congress, from different agencies. At one point in history, there, I think in the 80s, they did a study, there were over 60,000 pages of acquisitions regulation governing how the government buys something from a company, which can make it seem pretty complex. And there's a lot of things you got to think about, but here are some points that I want you to consider. So whether you've been doing this for a while and it's just good to have a refresher, or you're new to the game, I want you to think about these things. So some initial questions you want to ask yourself are, does the government buy what I sell? You can go to usaspending.gov and find this out pretty easily, right? In most cases, the question or the answer to that question is going to be yes. I mean, the government's the biggest spender on earth, at least so they say. And if there is a bigger spender on goods and services from small business owners in particular, but all companies at large, I'd like to know who that is, right? So regardless of whether or not that's true, they are a huge spender and they buy just about everything that you can think of. So first you confirm, do they buy, or you answer that question, do they buy what you sell? The answer is probably yes. How much of it are they buying? That's going to give you a good sense of whether or not you should be going after opportunities. Again, in most industries, that number is going to be large, and it's definitely going to be worth at least considering going after some of these contracts. The next thing I ask myself is, who in the government is buying what I sell? So I want you to remember, most people in the government can't buy anything from you. And it's usually not the user. Usually the user of whatever it is that you sell will never be able to buy anything from you. You're targeting acquisitions officers, typically. You're targeting program managers. In some cases, we're working with users as well, but we want to understand who's doing the buying. This is something else we can do with government research tools. So, and then the third thing is, how does the government buy what you sell? Okay, so those are some things we want to answer right up front before I get into my main thesis here, right? So once we know that the government buys what you sell, once we know the major agencies and the acquisitions offices within them that are really the big spenders in your area, and we know how they're buying. So are they using something like a GSA contract to buy what you're selling? Is there an avenue for simplified acquisitions or sole source contracting? There's lots of different methods that the government can use to put a company on contract, but you want to understand what those are. You don't want to go out and get a GSA schedule if the government doesn't use GSA to buy your particular product or service, right? And this is actually a pretty good thing to touch on, because a lot of companies they have a very surface level understanding of how the government buys things. They see GSA and they're like, oh, I'm going to go get this schedule. And then, the work's going to start coming in, and then they get it after 6 months of trying and probably spending money, and then nothing comes in, right? So, in some things, like if you're selling office supplies or something, you're going to see a lot of that going through GSA. But there are other industries, even software to a certain degree, depending on where your focus area, where you might see GSA only make up 10% of the sales or 20% of the sales. So it really depends. And we can see with very precise accuracy how much of this is going through the GWACs, how much of this is going through GSA, how much of this is sole source, how much of this goes to small businesses. We can see all these numbers because the government has to report their spending. And this is one nice thing about selling to the government. Okay, so we've done our homework, right? The government buys what you sell. There's probably 2 or 3 main ways that the government is making purchases in your category. We know who's doing it. So now the question is, what do you do, right? And so this is where the title comes from, because I've had several companies come to me recently, and this has happened throughout while I was in the Air Force, as a program manager and after as a consultant. I still hear it. I hear it enough where I think maybe periodically I just need to get on the podcast and state this. If your first engagement with the government is responding to an RFP or an RFQ, that's a request for proposal or a request for quote, meaning you registered your company, you're in sam.gov, and you see that RFP, and this is where the government, this is the official process where the government is asking for bids on something. They have a requirement, they have money, and they want the companies out there to bid on that. And you look at it and you say, this is perfect for my business. I'm selling these widgets or I'm selling these services or I developed this tech that can fit it. And you write a proposal, which is no laughing matter. Those proposals have to be written precisely and they take a lot of time. And then you don't win, right? And this is the case, 99 times out of 100, if you're responding to an RFP or an RFQ, and that's your first interaction with the program office or with the government agency that's sending that out, that's probably your result. It's going to be barely any success or none, right? And this is the reason. It's not rigged. That's what I often see too. Or I also hear, oh, it looks like it's written for my competitors. And what I tell people is it's not rigged, but it was written for your competitors. And here's why. And by the way, there is nothing shady going on here in most cases, right? There's always corruption everywhere in every organization. So I don't want to say never, but what's happening here is the federal acquisitions regulations govern the entire life cycle of process, right, for how we're going to buy something. Think about it this way. The solicitation is towards the end of the purchasing timeline, right? So when the solicitation actually comes out, the government personnel that are doing the purchasing, meaning the contracting officer and the program management team, they have the handcuffs on. They can't talk to you. It's already decided. Like the requirements are decided. They know what's in there. All you can do at that point is write a proposal and hope that you've done it well and that they're going to score you well. But before that solicitation comes, there's something called the market research phase. And this is where you want to live if you're a company. This is where you're finding out about those opportunities. When I say that, I mean the RFPs and the RFQs, those official solicitations that are coming out. You want to find out about those before they come out. And there's lots of ways to do that, especially once you know the agency that buys what you sell. That's why it's important to do your homework first, right? So we'll take the Air Force because I love the Air Force. It's the greatest of the services, right? So when you, and I'm saying that a little tongue-in-cheek, but I kind of mean it too. So when you identify that maybe the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center is, and maybe even an office within there, a certain PEO, maybe a certain division or branch within there do they have a responsibility for buying the type of thing that you're selling? And you see that, now it makes it a lot easier to start determining what their requirements are and finding out about things ahead of time. So why are we finding out about it ahead of time? Well, when you find out about that ahead of time, when I put my program manager hat on, I had to figure out, meaning in the government as a program manager, if I had a potential solicitation, meaning I had to put a company on contract to solve a problem set that the government had, and there's going to be requirements, sure, and there's going to be funding, but I still need to figure out what are the details that are going to go into this. Are there any companies that can do this? Are there any small businesses that can do this? So, when you think about a contract that's set aside for a small business, that doesn't happen by accident, right? The government needs to know that there are small businesses out there that can do this. So in this market research phase, that's where the program manager, the contracting officer are going to go and say, all right, businesses, we are looking for information. This is when you see something called a request for information or a sources sought. When you see that come out, that's the government saying, hey, we have something coming up, and it's real, by the way. And that's another big important thing for you to realize is if you're just reaching out to government offices, you're wasting your time unless they have funding and contracting vehicles, like a way to put you on contract. You need somebody that has money and a requirement to buy what you sell. So that's why we want it to be targeted. I'm going to stick with RFIs and sources sought because you can find those on sam.gov. So you see a request for information now to buy widget X, right? Now you're way ahead of the solicitation. So you're responding to this request for information. And when you respond to it, yes, you're answering their questions, but you're also telling them about your company. We're a small business. Maybe you're recommending that they set it aside for a small business. If you could do that, you've eliminated competition, right? Maybe you're a woman-owned small business. Now, if you can recommend that they set that aside for a woman-owned small business, you have eliminated even more competition. But you're not just doing that. You're trying to provide value here. You're trying to help the program office. They need to write that solicitation. So you want to help them write that. You want to put everything in there, as much detail as you can, so they can put a solicitation together that is not only going to benefit the actual requirement and the warfighter, if it's a military or government agency, But also these are things that your company can do. Might be you can recommend past performance or certifications that you have. You can recommend, if you have GSA, you can recommend that they use GSA as the contract vehicle. There are a lot of things that you can do here to influence this, so you have a better opportunity to win when the solicitation comes out. Right now, what else can you do? Well, you respond to this. You don't just respond to it. You confirm that they receive it, but you also want to request a meeting with the program office. In this phase, in the market research phase, you can do that. You can request to sit down with them, give them a demonstration, give them a presentation. It doesn't mean that they're going to put you on contract, but it certainly means they're going to know who you are. They're going to understand what you do a little bit better, and they might take all of that into account when they put that solicitation together. Now, in some cases, this may never even get competed, right? You may be the only one that can truly solve the problem for the government, or the only one that responds. So that could equal just a contract between you and the government agency. Something else that's happening here is when you're meeting with that office, if you respond to something like this, that's your way in for that meeting. And when you have that meeting, not only can you influence this, but you can ask them, hey, do you know anybody else that could potentially use our product or solution? And if they know, they're going to try to help you. I always tried to help small businesses. You'd be surprised, they're going to want to help you. And if they have a program manager or somebody in the military or in a government agency that they know have that requirement and have funding, they'll point you in the right direction. So now that's opening you up to possibilities that you didn't even know about before you sat down there. So now let's take this situation. In the first one, you were just responding to the RFP and you didn't win, right? And it looked like the solicitation was written for your competitor. But now in this situation where you already, in situation 2, what I just explained, you responded to the RFI, you had a meeting, talked to them, you recommended a bunch of things. Now that solicitation comes out and it looks like it was written for you because you helped them write it. Does that mean you're going to win? No, you might not win. You still have to write a proposal that it's still going to be reviewed and scored, but you're much more likely to win. Think about it. You helped them write it. They know who you are. In addition to that, you're going to know more about this because you've asked them, you had a meeting with the office. You've been asking them questions. Most people responding to an RFP or an RFQ have not gone through the process of, identifying it 6 months out with an RFI or source of sought, responding to it, having a meeting, maybe multiple meetings. So now you've created that relationship. You've helped write the solicitation, essentially. They know who you are. You have more information, which is going to allow you to craft a better proposal, which could be scored at a higher level than the other ones that are in there. Now, there's lots of ways to put companies on contract besides these competed opportunities, but you could see how this process is what is going to win you the contracts. This is what companies that are savvy, that are winning over and over again, this is what they're doing. You're not going to win everything, but you're going to win a lot more when you're going about it this way. So hopefully this takeaway for you will give you something to think about. You want to live in that market research phase. It's a longer process. Selling to the government is not easy and it's not fast. It can be lucrative, right? And you have a lot of public information that most people aren't taking advantage of. So there are ways to do this in a very smart and strategic way where you don't have to waste your time, but you do have to spend time doing this. It's a marathon. So what are we doing? We identify who buys what you sell and how they buy. We find opportunities ahead of time. And in this example, you're responding to a request for information. You're writing a solid request for information, not just a marketing document that you're not doing anything. You're writing it for the requirement. You're helping them. You're helping the government figure out how to solve a problem, trying to get a meeting with them. And then you have to track when if it is going to go and become a request for proposal or request for quote, you have to track when that's going to come out. Right. So and you have to write a solid proposal, but that's now the process, right? So we've started a lot earlier, we've put in a lot more work. And now when that comes out, you're much more likely to win. And so you want to do that. You're rinsing and repeating and you're creating relationships. And of course, you're always asking who else could use what our solution is providing. So that's it in a nutshell. Remember, we're not just responding to the RFP, we are identifying it way before it ever comes out, and then we're working towards that goal. If you want help with this, you can reach us at dodcontract.com. We have courses. We have done with you services and done for you services. So check those out. You can always request a consultation if you want more in-depth help or you work with us. and we'll put a roadmap together for your company. We do an in-depth review. So we are actually doing a lot of the work that I just talked about, where we're putting a strategic step-by-step plan on how we can target the right agencies. We'll tell you which ones to target. We'll help you influence those. And eventually you're looking at the contract win. As long as you have a solid service or offering and you have the willpower to put in the time to finally close those contracts. So go to dodcontract.com, check that out. Thank you for tuning in this week. I got a couple awesome interviews scheduled that will be coming up. Stay tuned for that. Hey, remember, like, subscribe, leave comments. This really helps us to formulate what we're going to put out there. So the more comments especially really help us. You can ask questions. I will respond to you personally. You can suggest topics, which we will also cover in some of the podcast episodes. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.